Waitress mistreated Robert Downey Jr. at an upscale restaurant in downtown Los Angeles, completely unaware that he was the owner of the place. What happened next stunned everyone in the room and left a lasting lesson about humility and kindness. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's inspiring tale. The Velvet Fork was one of LA's trendiest restaurants, known for its exclusive clientele, lavish meals, and head chef James Linton, whose name alone could draw a crowd. Celebrities often filled its plush booths, but tonight, something unusual happened. Among the sparkling dresses and tailored suits, a man walked in wearing a plain hoodie, faded jeans, and sneakers. That had clearly seen better days. That man was Robert Downey Jr. Most people didn't notice him at first. He blended in like any regular person. Without his usual polished red carpet look, his appearance was almost unrecognizable. Yet, he seemed completely at ease, strolling through the room like someone simply enjoying the moment. He was shown to a small table tucked away in the corner, where he picked up the menu and began scanning it thoughtfully. Meanwhile, Lisa, a waitress who had only been at the Velvet Fork for a few weeks, was rushing between tables. She was visibly stressed, balancing trays of drinks while trying to maintain the restaurant's high standards for service. Lisa spotted Robert's table and frowned slightly. His casual clothes immediately stood out, and she couldn't help but assume he was in the wrong place. People came to the Velvet Fork to flaunt wealth, not blend in. Rolling her eyes, she walked over and plastered on her best customer service smile. "Good evening," she said curtly, barely looking at him. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" Robert glanced up, his expression calm and friendly. "Just water, thank you." Lisa's smile tightened. "Sure, water." She spun on her heel and headed for the kitchen, muttering under her breath. "Water? What is this, a diner?" By the time she returned, Lisa was even more annoyed. She set the water down a little too firmly, causing some of it to slosh over the rim. "Ready to order, or do you need more time?" she asked, her tone clipped. Robert didn't seem fazed. He smiled again, ignoring the subtle attitude. "I'll have the truffle pasta, please." Her eyebrows raised slightly as she jotted it down. "Truffle pasta," she repeated, the sarcasm barely hidden. It was one of the most expensive items on the menu. She gave him a quick once-over, from his fraying hoodie to his scuffed sneakers, and smirked. "All right, coming right up." As she walked back to the kitchen, she whispered to another server, "Can you believe that guy? Ordering truffle pasta in that outfit? What's he doing here?" The other server glanced over at Robert's table and chuckled. "Maybe he's lost." Meanwhile, Robert sipped his water and looked around the restaurant. He watched as couples shared fancy desserts and business partners clinked glasses over deals. He seemed entirely unaffected by the whispers or the occasional judgmental glance. Lisa, however, couldn't stop herself from sneaking glances at him. Something about him didn't sit right. He looked out of place, but there was also a quiet confidence about him that she couldn't quite understand. It annoyed her even more. What neither Lisa nor anyone else in the room realized was that the man they were dismissing as an ordinary diner actually owned the restaurant they were working in. And the way he handled what was about to happen would leave everyone in the room stunned. Lisa hurried back to the kitchen, still fuming over the man at table 7. She couldn't wrap her head around it. Someone waltzing into the Velvet Fork, looking like they just rolled out of bed, and then ordering the most luxurious dish on the menu. It didn't make sense. I mean, Who does that? She muttered to herself as she grabbed the tray of appetizers for another table. Who does what? Asked Jake, the bartender, raising an eyebrow as he polished a glass. Lisa gestured toward the dining room. That guy in the corner. Hoodie, Sneakers ordered the truffle pasta, like he's some kind of big shot. He doesn't belong here, Jake chuckled. Careful, Lisa. You never know who people really are. Might be a billionaire dressed like that. Yeah, right, she scoffed. More like someone who scraped together just enough to sit here and pretend. As Lisa returned to the dining area, her irritation only grew when she saw Robert. Downey Jr. still sitting calmly, seemingly oblivious to the judgmental stares coming his way. He wasn't fidgeting or checking his phone like most guests. Instead, he was looking around, taking in the restaurant as though it were a stage and everyone in it was part of a play. Lisa approached his table with forced politeness. Your pasta will be ready soon, she said, her tone just a shade too formal. Take your time, Robert replied with a warm smile. It's nice to just sit and enjoy the atmosphere, Lisa blinked. Enjoy the atmosphere? Nobody talked like that here. People came to the Velvet Fork to see and be seen, to Instagram their food and brag about their reservations. But this guy? He acted like he couldn't care less. Nearby, a table of businessmen burst into laughter, raising their glasses. In a toast. Their booming voices carried across the room, a stark contrast to Robert's quiet presence. Lisa caught snippets of their conversation about mergers and private jets, and it only added to her annoyance. That was the kind of clientele she expected here, not him. But Robert didn't seem to notice the businessmen or the glances from other tables. His focus remained on Lisa, who shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. You seem busy, Robert said kindly, gesturing to the full room. Lisa let out a short laugh. You could say that. It's always like this on a Friday night. Well, you're doing a great job, he said sincerely. Lisa froze for a second. Compliments weren't unusual, but there was something about the way he said it calm, genuine, that caught her off guard. She nodded quickly and stepped away, unsure how to respond. As the night went on, Lisa couldn't shake her irritation. Every time she passed his table, Robert seemed perfectly content, as though the chaos around him didn't exist. And it wasn't just Lisa who noticed. Who's the guy in the hoodie? Asked one of the other servers during a quick break. Lisa rolled her eyes. Just some random guy pretending to fit in. Probably saved up for weeks to eat here. The other server replied, unconvinced. He doesn't seem like he's pretending. He's way too relaxed, Lisa sighed. Yeah, well, let's see how relaxed he is when the check comes. Meanwhile, Robert's meal arrived, and he took his time savoring every bite of the truffle pasta. Lisa couldn't help but notice how differently he behaved from the usual customers. Most people devoured their food while snapping pictures, eager to show it off. But Robert, he ate slowly, thoughtfully, like he was genuinely enjoying it, not just the taste, but the experience itself. At one point, he waved Lisa over. This is incredible, he said, gesturing to the plate. My compliments to the chef. Lisa forced a smile. I'll let him know, she said. Flatly. As she walked away, she muttered under her breath, compliments to the chef. Who even says that anymore? But the night was far from over. In fact, what happened next would change Lisa's view of the world and her place in it forever. As the evening progressed, the energy at the Velvet Fork shifted. The dining room was alive with conversation, the clink of silverware, and the occasional burst of laughter. Yet there was an unspoken tension building around table 7. Robert Downey Jr. sat quietly, finishing his meal, while Lisa tried her best to avoid him. She couldn't stop thinking about him. His calm demeanor, his casual clothes, it all felt out of place in this high-class environment. But what annoyed her most was the nagging thought that he might actually belong here more than some of the regulars. She shook the idea from her head. No way. Then the unexpected happened. Lisa was refilling drinks at another table when one of the businessmen stood up abruptly and approached Robert. The man, tall and impeccably dressed, was clearly tipsy, and his booming voice carried across the room. "Hey," the man said, pointing at Robert. "You look familiar, aren't you?" Robert looked up, his expression polite, but unreadable. "I don't think we've met." The businessman squinted, his brow furrowing. "No, I know you from somewhere. What's your name?" "Robert," he replied simply, taking a sip of water. The businessman stared for a moment before shaking his head. "No, doesn't ring a bell. Must be someone else with—" A shrug, he wandered back to his table, laughing loudly with his friends. Lisa watched the exchange from the other side of the room, her curiosity piqued. She knew she shouldn't eavesdrop, but she couldn't help herself. Who was this guy? And why was he so calm, even when people were practically staring holes into him? She decided to check in on him one more time, partly out of duty and partly because she couldn't ignore the strange aura surrounding him. "Everything all right here?" she asked, her voice a mix of politeness and impatience. "Perfect," Robert said, looking up at her with that same warm smile. "This place is amazing. You must be proud to work here." Lisa blinked, taken aback. Proud? She'd never thought about it that way. To her, the velvet fork was just a job, a stepping stone to something better. "I guess," she said, shrugging. "It's just a restaurant." Robert tilted his head, his gaze thoughtful. "It's more than that. Places like this don't just serve food, they create experiences. Memories. That's pretty special." Lisa didn't know what to say. For a moment, she felt like he was speaking directly to her soul, like he could see right through the layers of frustration and ambition she carried every day. But before she could respond, a commotion broke out near the bar. One of the businessmen, the same one who had approached Robert earlier, was arguing with a bartender about his tab. His voice grew louder, drawing the attention of the entire room. "I don't care what it says. I didn't order 3 bottles of wine," the man bellowed, slamming his hand on the counter. The bartender, Jake, tried to stay calm. "Sir, this is your receipt. You signed for it. I want to speak to the manager." The man shouted, his face red with anger. Lisa's heart sank. This wasn't the first time a guest had caused a scene, but it was always uncomfortable. She glanced at Robert, expecting him to look annoyed or bothered by the disruption. Instead, he looked amused. "Rough night, huh?" Robert said, chuckling softly. Lisa sighed. "You have no idea." But then, something unexpected happened. Robert stood up and walked toward the bar. Lisa's eyes widened. "What is he doing?" "Excuse me," Robert said, his voice calm but firm as he addressed the angry businessman. "Is everything all right here?" The man turned, his face twisted with irritation. "Who are you?" "Just someone who appreciates good service," Robert replied, his tone even. "And I think you're making things harder for the staff than it needs to be." The room fell silent. All eyes were on Robert now. Lisa's heart raced as she watched the scene unfold, unsure of how this was going to end. The businessman sneered. "And what do you know about it?" You think you can just walk in here and lecture me? Robert smiled, unfazed. I think we all have a responsibility to treat people with respect. Don't you agree? For a moment, the businessman looked like he might explode. But then something shifted. Maybe it was the way Robert spoke, calm, direct, and without a hint of arrogance. Or maybe it was the weight of everyone else's stares. Either way, the man grumbled under his breath and returned to his table without another word. Robert turned to Jake and the rest of the staff. Sorry about that, he said. You're doing a great job. Jake nodded, his expression a mix of gratitude and confusion. As Robert walked back to his table, the entire room seemed to breathe again. Lisa stood frozen, her mind racing. She couldn't believe what she'd just seen. Who was this guy? But little did she know, the biggest surprise of the night was still to come. As Robert Downey Jr. returned to his seat, the buzz in the restaurant grew louder. The entire room had witnessed his calm yet commanding presence as he diffused the tense moment at the bar. Whispers spread among the guests like wildfire, with many wondering who he was and why he seemed so comfortable standing up to a man twice his size without breaking a sweat. Lisa, however, was still trying to piece it all together. She had watched plenty of people come and go through the Velvet Fork, from socialites to movie stars, but no one had ever handled a situation like that with such ease. Her curiosity was at an all-time high. Unable to resist, she approached Robert's table again. This time, her tone was less curt and more cautious. Is there anything else I can get for you? She asked, her voice soft. Robert glanced up and smiled. I'm all set, thank you. But I'd like to pay the bill now, if that's all right. Lisa nodded quickly, feeling oddly nervous as she went to grab the check. When she returned, she placed it on the table and waited, not knowing why she was lingering. Maybe she was hoping he'd say something that would finally give away who he was. Robert pulled out a sleek black card one Lisa had only seen a handful of times in her life. It was the kind of card reserved for the ultra-wealthy, with no limit and no questions asked. Her eyes widened slightly, but she tried to keep her expression neutral as she processed the payment. When she handed the card back, Robert paused. Actually, could you do me a favor? Lisa blinked. Of course. Could you ask the manager to come over? I'd like to speak with them. Lisa hesitated. Her mind raced. Was he going to complain? It didn't seem like his style, but she couldn't shake the anxiety bubbling in her chest. Sure, she said, turning quickly to find her boss. Moments later, the restaurant's manager, a polished man named David, approached Robert's table with a professional smile. Good evening, sir. I'm David. Is everything to your satisfaction? Robert nodded, standing to greet him. Everything was perfect. I just wanted to thank you personally for the incredible service. David's smile grew wider, clearly relieved. Thank you, sir. We're glad you enjoyed your evening. Lisa watched from a distance, trying to decipher the interaction. But then Robert's tone shifted slightly. You've built something really special here, he said, gesturing around the room. It's not easy to create a space that feels this welcoming and this high-end at the same time. David tilted his head, puzzled. I'm sorry, sir. I don't think I follow. Robert extended his hand, a playful smirk on his face. Robert Downey Jr. I'm the owner of the Velvet Fork. The room seemed to freeze. Lisa's heart dropped. For a moment, it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the restaurant. David's jaw practically hit the floor. You're the owner? He stammered. Robert nodded, his calm demeanor never wavering. "That's right. I wanted to see how things were running, so I thought I'd drop by unannounced. And I have to say, you're doing a fantastic job. The team is great, especially Lisa." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. Did he just say my name? David's face turned a shade of red, a mix of shock and embarrassment. "Thank you, sir. We're honored to have you here." Robert chuckled lightly. "The honor's mine. But if I can give you one small note, make sure the staff knows that everyone deserves the same level of respect, no matter how they're dressed." David's eyes darted to Lisa, who felt like she might melt into the floor. "Of course, sir. We'll address that immediately," David said, his voice shaky. Robert turned back to Lisa, his expression kind but firm. "And Lisa, you're a hard worker. I can see that. But sometimes it's easy to let assumptions get in the way of seeing people for who they really are. Trust me, I've been judged a lot in my life. It's not fun, is it?" Lisa could barely speak. "No, sir," she mumbled, her cheeks burning. Robert gave her a gentle smile. "Don't worry. You're doing great. Just remember, every person has a story, even if it's not obvious at first." With that, he shook David's hand, left a generous tip on the table, and walked toward the exit. The room was completely silent, every patron and staff member watching him leave as if they had just witnessed something extraordinary. But for Lisa, the moment wasn't just extraordinary, it was life-changing. Lisa stood frozen at the edge of the dining room, Robert Downey Jr.'s words replaying in her mind. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The man she'd dismissed as out of place, who she judged based on his clothes and demeanor, was not only a guest, but the owner of the velvet fork. Her face burned with embarrassment as she cleared his table, where he'd left a tip large, enough to make her eyes widen. Folded neatly next to it was a note scribbled on the back of a napkin: "Keep up the good work." Humility goes a long way. The room had returned to its usual hum of conversation, but Lisa felt like she was moving through a fog. She replayed every interaction she'd had with him that night, cringing at her own impatience and assumptions. How had she let herself be so blind? As she carried the dishes back to the kitchen, Jake, the bartender, leaned over the counter with a grin. "So, how does it feel to have been sassed by Robert Downey Jr. and get complimented by him?" Lisa groaned, covering her face with her hands. "Don't remind me. He likes you, though," Jake said, tossing a towel over his shoulder. "You must have done something right." Lisa shook her head. "No, I was rude. And he saw right through me," Jake shrugged. "Maybe. But he also saw potential. People like him don't waste their words." That thought stuck with her as the night wore on. By the time the restaurant began winding down, Lisa was left with a mix of gratitude and guilt. Gratitude for the lesson Robert had given her, and guilt for how she had treated him. When the last table cleared and the staff gathered to debrief, David, the manager, addressed everyone with an unusually serious tone. "I don't think I need to tell you all what kind of night we had," he began. "I know some of you already figured it out, but yes, our owner, Robert Downey Jr., was here tonight." Gasps rippled through the group, even from staff who hadn't realized who he was. Lisa felt like all eyes were on her, even though no one said a word. David continued. He gave us some very important feedback. "And if there's one thing we need to take away from this, it's that every guest, every single one, deserves respect, no matter how they look, dress, or act. We're here to provide an experience, and that means leaving judgments at the door." Lisa nodded along with the others, but her heart felt heavy. She wasn't just hearing a message from her boss, she was feeling the weight of a personal wake-up call. As the staff filed out for the night, Lisa lingered behind, tidying up a few last things. Her thoughts churned as she stacked menus and wiped down tables. She had always thought she was good at her job, quick, efficient, and professional. But tonight, Robert had shown her there was more to it than just doing tasks. She remembered his words. Every person has a story, even if it's not obvious at first. How many stories had she missed because she was too focused on the surface? By the time she left the restaurant, the streets of Los Angeles were quiet, the neon lights casting a soft glow on the sidewalk. Lisa looked up at the sky, feeling a strange mix of humility and hope. She realized she wasn't just walking away from another shift, she was walking toward a new perspective. The way Robert had handled everything with kindness, patience, and a touch of humor stayed with her. She wanted to carry that into her own life, both at work and beyond. Because if there was one thing she'd learned tonight, it was that appearances can be deceiving, and respect doesn't cost a thing, but it's worth everything. As Lisa walked home that night, the city lights reflected her swirling thoughts. What had started as a typical shift at the Velvet Fork had turned into an unforgettable lesson, all thanks to a man who showed her that true worth wasn't about appearances or status, it was about how you treated others. The image of Robert Downey Jr.'s calm smile and those words scribbled on the napkin stayed with her. Humility goes a long way. She knew they weren't just meant for her, they were meant for anyone who needed a reminder to look beyond the surface and see the humanity in others. And now, that message is meant for you. How often do we judge people based on what we see? How many opportunities do we miss to connect with others because we're too quick to label them? Tonight's story is a powerful reminder that everyone has a story, and sometimes the people we least expect have the most to teach us. So the next time you find yourself making a snap judgment, pause. Think about Robert's words. Humility, kindness, and respect, they cost nothing, but they can change everything. If this story resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from? What part of this story spoke to you the most? Share your thoughts, and let's start a conversation about treating each other with the dignity we all deserve. And if you love inspiring stories like this, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We've got more tales coming your way, stories of kindness, resilience, and the incredible power of small actions. Because in the end, it's not about who we appear to be, it's about who we choose to be.